Hello, everybody, and welcome to Podcast Creators, a show where we get podcasting advice from real podcasters. I'm your host, Greg, creator of Indie Drop-In Network and co-host of Fan Dummies podcast. On the show today, we have Mike Cunningham, host of Gill Athletics Track and Field Connections. It's a really great show with hundreds of episodes. I think you're going to have a great time. Mike gets into all sorts of goodies, including business, podcasting, and if all businesses should have a podcast, personal podcasting, and maybe how to use a podcast to ensure the legacy of your family, which I think is really amazing, and how to set proper expectations when you're starting a podcast, which I know we all want to go viral and have an amazing podcasting experience right from our first episode. Well, Mike keeps us grounded a little bit. As always, we'll put all the links in the show notes below. This episode was recorded on Riverside FM, so if you're into the quality or you like the way this looks, we'll put a link down in the description box below, along with every other link to everything we talk about today. All right, here we go. Hello, Mike, and welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm awesome, man. Greg, thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. We hope to really utilize that brain to figure out indie podcast tips. So don't hold any of those back.
Man, the reason I do things like this is to give as much value as possible. So I'm going to be who I am and give you what I know and probably mess up half of it, but half of it's going to be really good.
It's going to be great. And I'll edit the parts that are messed up. So you're going to look like a genius. Awesome. I'll look like a genius. I mean, it'll just be great.
You've got a challenge ahead of you, but that sounds good.
Yeah. So this message is for Willie, my video editor. Make us look good.
Willie, it's all on you, buddy.
Yeah. So I browsed your podcast a little bit over the last couple days, and there's absolutely no doubt that you know what you're doing. You have hundreds of episodes, which is a huge amount of work. So why don't we start by just setting the stage? Tell us who you are, what your podcast is about, just the basics.
So my current podcast, I'm kind of on my third iteration. This one is through our company here, Gill Athletics. So this is the first corporate podcast. Mm-hmm. The other two have been kind of personal passion projects. They actually were so that I could learn how to podcast so I could do it for work.
Smart.
So, yeah. Make the mistakes on my own before I, flub it at work and get fired, basically. So, so this podcast is really because it's under the corporate flag. It's really about kind of three things: marketing, biz dev, and value, giving value back to our customers. So what we do is we do very long form. There's kind of the joke, and the people that listen to our podcast, we average an hour and 30, and we've gone as high as like 3 hours, because what we do is we really kind of do the bio of the coach. So we talk about when they first got into track, their different coaching stops,
sure.
Their mentors, things like that. So, but we use it all for a lot of marketing and biz dev, for projects and things like that.
That's amazing. And we're going to get into that a little bit. I really want to understand the value of a podcast to a business, and we're going to dig into that. My first real question is do you think you could do a 30-minute interview, or should I schedule more time?
I just put in the can a 40-minute one, and I was so proud. I was like,
wow.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Well, one thing I like to start out with, because as you know, podcasters are always asking, what kind of microphone are they using? What kind of, hosting do they have? So maybe you can start with let's have a sounds like Mike segment here and tell us what microphone you have, what equipment you're using, all that good stuff.
Yeah, really good question. And really a common question, right? When I got into podcasting, of course, I go to the Reddit forums and online and CNET and just everybody, right? There's so much information out there. Thank goodness. And that's one of the top questions and commentary is what kind of equipment. I'm probably not a real good person to ask that because I'm a real in the dirt kind of guy, right? So I don't get hung up on, it has to be perfect to get going. So when I first started, I found Anchor. I think everybody, a ton of podcasts are done through Anchor. So hopefully everybody knows Anchor, and found it because it was free and it was simple. And that was all I needed. I could use my phone. So that's how I first started. So, the first podcast, that I ever did, the audio, I mean, it is terrible. You're doing it through the phone, and, there's a lot of hangups and stuff like that. When I transitioned and started doing it here for the company, it still started out that way. I could not go to my company and say, hey, I need X amount of dollars to start this thing that no one else is doing in our field, and still seems kind of fringe and, not accepted in the sense of what the world is, right? It's kind of like the wild, wild west of when social first started back in the day with the Facebooks and Twitters and MySpaces and whatnot. So now, we created a little mini studio here at work. So I do have, the acoustic paneling and all that kind of good stuff. I went out and found, honestly, kind of I don't know if it was the cheapest package I could find on Amazon, but I think it was for $200. I found a company called Rockville. It's probably a private label. It's probably, everybody has probably the same mic on this level of cost. And, but it was a package that worked for me, right? So it had 2 mics, had all the, the windscreens and the pop filters and the boom arms, the headphones and the mixer. And so that's what I use. I use Rockville. It's not the greatest of quality, but it works. It works. That's kind of the basic line.
So that's what we're on right now.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. We're on a Rockville, and I don't even think I couldn't even tell you. I'm so bad. I don't even know, like the Rock Mix 2 is the interface.
Yeah.
A regular old handheld mic that I got on a boom arm. Yeah.
It's no problem. What I'll do is I'll have you just send me some pictures of the stuff, and then I'll put it in the description below. Perfect. So that way you don't have to even know it.
Perfect.
But it sounds great. I can't believe it was $200 or whatever you said you paid for it. Like, that's insanity. Like, I thought my stuff was economical, and I've got a Rodecaster and pod mics, and I thought, maybe I spent like $800, and I really thought I was doing something there, but you one-upped me big time.
Well, I think, my fear is that people don't get into podcasting because they think, oh, well, I have to spend $800 to $1,000. And certainly, there's a little bit of the addict of you get what you pay for. So certainly there's higher quality. Maybe this thing's going to go, I've had it for a little bit over probably a year now. Maybe it's going to bonk out of me in a year, after a year, but yeah, I'll pay another $200 or not even, because I'll just need the mic. But that's always my fear, is that people think, man, this hobby that I'm going to get into, or I want to do it at work, and it's going to cost me $1,000 or more, where all of our other kind of social media hobbies are free, right? You just need the phone, and then you set up your Twitter account, etc. So yeah, I always like to just kind of down and dirty, man. How do you get it done? And then, work your way and get better as you move through it.
Sure. And do you still use Anchor for your current podcast?
I do. As again, you can read everything out there and how good or bad Anchor is. We have been 100% satisfied with what they provide for free.
Yeah. And that's why the purpose of the show is to talk to real podcasters, right? I don't want the marketing. I want the real experiences from people that are out there doing it. And like we said earlier, you've got over 200 shows. And, you're doing it with $200 worth of equipment and a free hosting service. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, for sure. We use Anchor for all the distribution and hosting. The only thing that we did add that would cost, a bit of money, maybe almost as much as what we paid for our audio setup here, is so we record through Zoom. And as we wanted to get into more than one guest on at a time, so we've done some where we've interviewed the entire staff at the same time. You do have to pay for that next level up in Zoom to get that, or you can only do it for 45 minutes. And like I said, I'm still doing my intro 45 minutes, but so we paid for that. And I think that's, I don't know, off the top of my head, it was like 100 to 120 for an annual subscription there. So all in less than 500, and then your time, which can get there. The time is extreme.
So that's a great segue. How much time do you think you spend on this show? Let's say a week.
Yeah. So, down and dirty, you're going to hear that term all through this podcast. So, there's a whole subculture of the editing side of podcast, and I have a quote unquote real job to still do. So, I still have, as the national sales manager, I still have a ton of other things to do and travel. So I don't spend a lot of time. I used to take our audio from the Zoom and put it through Audacity and do a couple of filters through there. That just takes time. And I honestly could not, Zoom, not that great taking the audio file to a podcast. It works, but it's not what it comes out of, directly if you're recording like through other software. But it's good enough for what we're doing. So I literally take that audio file, drop it straight into Anchor. I do have a pre-recorded intro, and we schedule it to post. So the hours that I spend on it is really the interview itself. It's about getting to know my guest, and building that relationship and that link there. So, 2 hours a week, depending on how many interviews I do in a week.
You might be the poster child for keeping it simple.
Keep it simple, baby.
On average, I think a 1 episode show a week, a podcaster, like maybe a storytelling podcaster, probably spends more than 40 hours to produce a 1 hour episode.
I wish I did do it differently. Like I wish I had some time, because there are we do get up to sometimes 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And I do realize, all this kind of started is maybe a lot of other people have this experience. I was this past tense now, a fan of the Joe Rogan experience. Like I liked his style. I liked the long form. You really got into a lot of stories and tangents. I liked his, interview style. And so that's kind of where I mimicked that style off of. But I do wish I could take, a 2 hour audio and put it down into like a narration form to where, I'm post editing. I'm saying like, hey, coach, really brought up a good point about the new NIL. Here's what he had to say. And then I run it. And so I'm cutting out a lot of periphery, if you will. I just don't have time. If you're a full-time podcaster, attaboy, that's exactly what you should maybe be doing for your style. But for me, I've got, when I record a 2 hour podcast during work, I've got 5 phone calls that I've missed and about 20 emails that I've missed back in my office, and I've got to get it done. So I just kind of forego that side and non-apologetically just get the content out there and provide the value to our listeners. Right.
So maybe we can talk about the current state of the show, because like we keep saying, it's been around a little while now. You got a bunch of episodes out. What do you think your monthly average downloads are for an episode? Just kind of a round number.
Yeah. So we've been doing this since January 20 and marketing it since April of 20, and we're at 52,000 downloads. So monthly, we're probably at about 2,000 to 3,000. Depends a lot on the guest. If it's a quote unquote big name, it gets more obviously. But I'd say about 2,000 to 3,000 a month.
So when you first started, did you create a launch plan? Did you sketch out what you wanted to do? Kind of run us through the beginning stages of it.
I wish I did. I wish I was that smart and that coach, intelligent to do things like that. And I think you should, because it'll help you not make as many mistakes as I did. But when I kind of wrapped up my personal podcast, so I'd interviewed people, kind of understood my style and what I wanted to accomplish on it corporately. It was then, okay, how do I get this done through our company? And I'm a little bit of I've been here 15 years now, so I get a little bit of a leeway. I'm more of a ask for forgiveness than permission person. So I didn't tell anybody at work. I didn't tell my bosses. I just said, okay, I'm going to do it. And then it was about, well, who's going to be the first get? Like, no one was doing this in our space. January or 2020 was kind of the year of the podcast, right? Since the pandemic hit, umpteen million more people started doing podcasts, and that's awesome. Unfortunately, it also counterbalanced itself because less people were traveling. And so a lot of people listen to podcasts traveling. So listenership kind of counterbalanced the number of podcasts that were going out, but no one in our space in January of 2020 was doing a podcast. So when I went to go ask my first coach, hey, here's this crazy idea I've got going on. Would you like to be our guest? It was a little nerve wracking because it was so foreign. It's like, what are you doing, Mike? You're the guy who sells me my shot puts. Why are you trying to interview me? But as we, kept doing it and stayed consistent with it. And then as the pandemic hit, coaches were starting so many podcasts in our area in track and field got started. It almost became like, if you're not on a podcast, do you even coach? This is kind of how it started going.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I have all sorts of questions around value, right? So what value do you think Gill Athletics gets from your podcast? You're obviously interviewing your customers, probably the decision makers or one of the decision makers in a school.
Yeah, you're it, right? People want to do business with people that they like and that are people that are like them. So for us, it's a little bit of a mixture. I was a college track coach before I came here. So a lot of people that are around my age and above, I coached with or against or, at the same time. So the guests are kind of a half and half mix. Some of them, half of them are coaches that I actually know. Like I've known them maybe for upwards of 20 years at this point. And then other coaches are honestly people I have never met at all. I know nothing about them, but maybe they coach at such and such school.
Right.
What I've seen through 100 plus coaches now is both sides, the ones that I know real well and the ones I have no idea about. When we're done with this interview, which takes 2 hours no matter what for a pre and post interview and that kind of stuff, we're connected. I mean, it's almost batting 1,000%, almost betting all the way on this. That after an interview happens, we'll get business from that coach. Like if we've never had business, we'll get something. It's almost like it's kind of the law of reciprocation. It feels like the coach is like, man, this guy is putting me on. I got to throw him a bone at least. Hey, can I get this $100 item now? And you start, with $100, which can beget, the big projects, which are thousands of dollars. So
yeah, I mean, it's all about getting the customer. Customer's total lifetime value is almost immeasurable.
Bingo.
Now, so here's the real question though. What does the coach get out of coming on the podcast?
Yeah, that's sometimes I ask myself that as well. Some of it's both intrinsic and extrinsic, right? So intrinsically, I've had a lot of coaches when we're done, they're like, man, that was a lot of fun to relive these stories, right?
Sure.
They've lived, they've coached 20, 30 years, had a lot of great experiences. And sometimes because the day-to-day, coaching, they don't get to think about the great teams they had 10 years ago or the experiences. Right. So some of it's intrinsically just like, man, I had a good time. Like this was cool to kind of give my story out there. Mm-hmm. Extrinsically, it's a little bit of ego, right? It's like, oh, see, I was on the Gill podcast. We're the world's largest track equipment manufacturer. So egotistically, I want to say we're a big deal in that sense. But there's a little bit of like, oh man, Gill put me on. They thought enough of me to have me on the show. There's thousands of coaches. I drop one episode a week. So I only get 52 coaches a year now.
Right.
That's a pretty select group. So there's a little bit of just ego of like, man, I'm someone I was put on by this podcast.
And I think they're right. I mean, you sit down, you think about who you want to have on and you choose them and then you reach out, I'm guessing, and tell them about the show and ask them if they want to be on. So I think they're right to be flattered. Mm-hmm. The other interesting thing when I was listening to your show, there's two things. One is the world is all about personal brand these days. And there's not a lot of outlets for any athletic people other than like, maybe pro sports for you to know who they are or for them to communicate their brand awareness, right? Their personal brands. What are they about? What do they believe in? What are they an expert in? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think as time goes on, individuals really have to work on their personal brands in a way that makes them employable. Mm-hmm. Right. So I really think that coaches should jump on getting on your show quickly, and you should be booked out hopefully for a year.
Yeah. And you're right. That's what I love about podcasting. I think of podcasting as an extension of social media. It's not normally thought of that way. When you hear social media, you think about the Instagrams and Twitters. I think of podcasting in that same family. Communication is majority body language. Secondary, it's tonality, and then the actual words, right? So when we're dealing with social media, typically we're only dealing with the words. And so we lose like what the intent behind it is. Podcasting, because you now add tonality to it, it really ups the game in communication and expression. Like I can really get to know someone hearing them tweet than just reading them in their tweet. So I just think it's huge in that sense.
Yeah. And brevity, invites misunderstanding. It's just the truth. I mean, emails and tweets and any monologue activities, people sit on the other side of that and they try to decode what's between the words when there might not be anything there.
And it's a both and thing, right? Like there's a place for that brevity. I think the problem is maybe we try to assign the same value to each style of communication. when that couldn't be further from the truth, right? A tweet does not hold the same value as an in-person conversation. Like that may be the two disparities right there, right? If I tweet someone or something, you don't know my tone, no body language. It's 280 characters, where if I'm meeting face to face, it could be hours and we're talking about family, etc. So, it's just, different values of that communication, but it is a both and. I think all of it is important.
Yeah. I just find it so interesting because if I was an athlete and I had a choice of schools, maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 schools trying to get me to go there, I would look at everything I possibly could about that coach, everything, the good and the bad, because that's my life for 4 years, probably.
That's a really good point. Now, you and I are looking at it in a different lens, right? So we have experience because we're 30, 40, 50 years old, right? Where you are talking about 18-year-old kids. So maybe not always. However, I have heard feedback from coaches who have been on the show. They've used it for recruiting. They've sent it to other high school coaches, et cetera. For college, they've sent it to their alumni. They're like, hey, here's who's leading your program. By the way, we're also fundraising. So they use it in that sense. So,
exactly.
And I've heard of coaches who have utilized it in regards to their own recruitment of finding other jobs, like ADs who have said, hey, I heard you on that podcast and you expressed some values that we actually really care about here. So, we're looking for a new coach. So it's been, you asked earlier, what does a coach get out of it? There's some other professionalism that happens for them as well because of it.
Yeah. And I think it's good for other people who are not podcasters to kind of understand that there is value. And I try anytime I interview a podcaster that is an interview show like yours, right? I try to understand where the value comes in, because I hope other people say yes to interviews, right? They're probably scared. They don't think they have anything interesting to say, but your life experiences are interesting. You're probably boring to your nephew. He's heard everything you have to say, but for the rest of the world, you're probably pretty interesting.
Yeah, I love that. That is exactly how I feel when the podcast before the Gill podcast, I'm just a ripoff artist. It was called the Mike Cunningham Experience. Stop me if you've heard that before, right?
There's millions of those.
Yeah. So the theme was that we are all commonly unique, but also uniquely common. Meaning we all have, we all struggle with things, relationship, health, financial, et cetera. All of us around the world, no matter what age, race, creed, et cetera. But we also are unbelievably unique. There is no one path to get to where you are today. You took a whole different path to get where you are today than your neighbor did. And that's interesting. We can learn from that. That's super, super exciting for me. That's why I love the long form format that we do, because we can really get into it and all the little twists and turns for each person's path.
So would you recommend that every business have a podcast?
Well, that's a good question. I wanted to automatically say yes. I think I would actually say no. The way you asked that, so every business should have a podcast. I also don't think that every business should have a Twitter or should have a Facebook, et cetera, right? On the social media side, like I get so tired and I don't want to overstate and say angry, but it's upsetting when a company has a Twitter, but they never respond. Like that, that's like having a phone number and never answering. So if you're going to do a podcast, my counsel would be that if you're not going to put it out in some kind of regularity, then don't do it. If it's just going to be hodgepodge, we do it on January 1 and then March 15th. And then you're not going to build up any kind of listenership that you're going to get. You're going to have to really drive the engine every time you publish that episode. But you don't have to do it we do it weekly with bonus episodes weekly as well. You don't have to do it weekly. It could be bi-weekly. It literally could be monthly. That also would work. It's just as long as you're on the same kind of cadence. And that you're doing it to give value to listeners, not to do it as a commercial. There's other aspects for it, to do commercials type marketing. I don't think podcasts are it.
Yeah, I listened very closely to see if you pushed any of your products on these coaches, and I don't believe that you mentioned anything. And I listened to maybe 2 or 3 almost all the way through, and I couldn't hear one sales pitch the entire time.
Yeah, that very intentional. First of all, I may be the worst salesman. I don't think I can convince anybody to do anything. So my job is more of like trying to figure out what are the issues you're having with your equipment, and then maybe we have the solution for it. So certainly going into this podcast, it was not going to be about, today's episode is about the greatest new hurdle we got coming out. No, that's not. Yeah.
Nobody's going to listen to that.
No one's going to listen to that. Rightfully so, by the way. Just like you wouldn't listen to a podcast from McDonald's to talk about their new value meal. Sorry, that's not what I'm putting this on my ears for to listen to.
Exactly. Well, maybe we can kind of shift gears just a little bit. You also teach a course in podcasting at a local school. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, life got real good for me when I started just like giving value to as many people as possible with zero expectation of return. So, in our space, at least in the track and field market, I kind of feel like I led the way for podcasting. So I was the first one to start. And then we had so many that, blew up and started doing themselves. And so I did everything I could to help them. I was the first guest for a lot of podcasters. People would reach out to me and say, "Hey, how did you start your podcast?" So I'd get on a Zoom call with them for, literally hours to go through like, "Hey, here's what, you sign up through Anchor, you do this, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I do. You might think about this." So that led me to actually, write an article on LinkedIn, kind of down and dirty. You want to start a podcast, man, I can get you up in 10 minutes. There are other things. I could write a book on how to do podcasting, but if you just want to get up and going, hey, I got a LinkedIn article for you. Let's roll. Right. And then it's interesting how things just kind of happen. A friend of a friend of my wife's, works for a community college up in the Chicago area, actually called, Triton Community College. And they were looking for someone to teach an intro to podcasting class.
Sure.
And that word intro was the key part to me. I was like, oh, like I'm no expert here, but I can get the hobbyist. I can get the person who wants to figure this thing out. I can do an intro, podcast. So I reached out to this school and I was like, there's no way. I mean, they're in Chicago, so there's a lot of people and a lot of podcasters, right? But I was like, if it all falls through, maybe they'll, have me do it. And, I interviewed with the dean of the continuing education and I got it.
Wow.
Sometimes you get desperate. You pick people out of a hat, I guess. So, the spring was our first, semester, a 12-week course, where we do it all through Zoom, and it's intro to podcasting. So I do a little bit about the history of podcasting, why podcasting might be important. And then we go through recording, possible videoing, marketing, brand, I'm doing these out of order here, but branding, the whole nine. Yeah, we do a 12-week course to get them from zero to hero.
So the students that you have, what have you learned from what they're trying to do? Like, how has it tuned your teaching styles? Maybe the best question.
Yeah. A lot of them are coming to the course looking for that pill, that magic pill. Like I don't know what's different about podcasting versus, I'm really big on Twitter. So I'll keep using Twitter as my example here. But when we put out a tweet and we have 100 followers, we have zero expectation that tweet is going to blow up to 1,000. Like we're like, man, we only have 100 followers. I mean, 50 people might see that, right?
We got one like. That was amazing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But for some reason in the podcasting world, it's probably because there's so much more work involved than a simple tweet. But we feel like, hey, if I put out this podcast and I tweet it and Instagram and Facebook it, I should get whatever you think success is, thousands of downloads per episode.
Right.
And so a lot of people are looking for that. How do I make this 1,000 download episode podcast? And I'm afraid the answer is what they don't. It's not. There's no magic pill. It's give value. Make sure your value is good. That you're providing something for people to come back to every week or every episode. And then two, it's longevity. it's doing it over and over and over and building that base one listener at a time almost, as you build up to whatever you deem as success. So that's what a lot of people are doing. And then the other half is, I have no clue. It just sounds like a cool thing. So teach me how to podcast.
Yeah. Wow. Do you remember back when you started this podcast, like at the very beginning, like what do you remember your first downloads? Like what your download numbers were when you first getting started? Yeah,
a little skewed. So from January through the end of March, I published, but didn't publicize at all. I would have done it a little differently, but I didn't tell the company, right? So it's just kind of like, let's see just what organically happens. And of course, organically nothing happened. The guest would know they were published, so they would tell their friends and family. So, it was if I got 50, I was like, whoa, hey, that's pretty cool, right? And then as I started doing it on my personal social, and I copped up to the bosses that, hey man, this has been going on. So we started doing it through our corporate social media and stuff like that. Certainly it took off, and, probably the lower end of our episodes are in the few hundreds. And then we'll have a pop out star that'll go, 600, 700, 800 pretty quickly.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question is because I just want to try to add some context to the new podcaster, right? Like you mentioned that everybody wants to put out a show and expect, that it touches the internet and people go, ooh, like what, who is this random person that I don't know who they are? Like I think I'm going to listen to everything that they say, and they're going to, I'm switching off of, Joe Rogan or, Armchair Expert, and I'm going to listening to Bill Sandwich Shop. It's that expectation we really need to fix. Right. And that's why I asked this context question, because I'm trying to help without being disparaging, which I do not want to do, because I would like people to create podcasts and be creative. And I hope somebody does create one where it touches the ether and people go, ooh, Greg has created a podcast, like that. I hope everyone gets success, but the reality of it is that it's a grind, and that, like anything worth doing, it happens in tiny increments. Like a friend of mine who's an athlete said to me, everything bad happens fast. Everything good happens really, really slow.
I like that.
Yeah.
You're spot on, right? And that's when I teach this class, like I talked to him, I was like, first of all, let's just lay the expectation you're not going to get rich off of this. So if that's your expectation, this is the wrong class. But also that, you have to be doing this for your own intrinsic reasons. Like you want to provide value. You want an outlet for your feelings or emotions, depending on what kind of podcast. I'm really big into teaching. I don't know what I actually would call it, but more like a heritage or legacy type of podcast. And what I mean by that is the podcast, you're actually doing it not for the mass of strangers, but you're doing it for your own family. So you're interviewing your grandma, your grandpa, your great aunt, grand uncle, and you're capturing their stories in a longevity form. Like we can come back. If someone were to interview me today about my history, when I pass along, and hopefully a long time from now, 40, 50
many years
ago,
from now,
my grandkids or my great grandkids who may never meet me will get to hear from me, hey, here's how I grew up in the 1980s, and here's what I was doing when I first had children in the 2010s and stuff. And there's it's like the old photographs that we find that are like so cool. It's like, wow, that's my great great grandfather back when he was on the farm. Well, now we can do that in audio form. So it's got to be intrinsic first, so that you set the expectations correct. And then corporately, you can have different expectations. But for the majority of podcasts, man, do it because you love to do it. That's actually, love them or hate them, that's how Joe Rogan started. He didn't start this by saying, I'm going to make this huge multi-million-dollar brand of the Joe Rogan Experience. Him and his buddies got on his computer and just made wisecracks because they're comedians about stuff. And then it built and built and built, and it is what it is today.
Yeah, there's so many shows that are like that, and it's the tactical steps that happen that I hope to communicate on this show. Just like what you said, I got a $200 setup, and I focus on value to my end customer, and then in turn, if that provides value to me, that's a bonus. Yeah,
and bringing it back to that microphone, it's a great circle back there. That would be my biggest piece of advice. If you're grinding along, I love that term you use there, Greg, and you think, well, how can I jump from 100 to 1,000? And it's like, you know what? There's this new microphone, the Blue Yetis and all this stuff. It's like, if I buy that'll do it. And it's like, man, your audio can be perfect. You can go to a professional studio all you want. If what you're giving out isn't of value to others, doesn't matter. Literally does not matter. A brand new mic, a brand new video, whatever, is not going to do it if the value you're creating isn't valuable.
Yeah. That is so true. So one thing that you mentioned to me online that I just want to say, because I read it and I thought to myself, oh man, this is going to be a fun interview. but you made the statement that everyone should have a podcast. Is that for the legacy purposes, or do you really think that everyone should try to make a go at a commercially successful podcast?
Yeah, when you say that to me after I just worked with your question of should every business have a podcast, I probably should walk it back, right? And what I mean by that when I say every person should have a podcast is, if someone were to come to you, Greg, and say, "Hey, should I start a Twitter account?" You would probably say, "Yeah, sure. What's the harm? Do it." But who cares if you don't post anything, or if you post the wrong thing, you delete whatever. Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah.
That is my attitude towards podcasting. Like, should I start a podcasting? Absolutely, do it. Figure it out. You'll learn. You'll get better just in your own life, just from learning and doing a new thing, which I'm a big believer in. So it's like, do it. Figure out whatever topic you want to do. Maybe you want to talk about being a parent, or maybe you want to talk about bicycling, or whatever you want to do. In today's world, you can find something that you're passionate about. There are other people that are passionate with you. So that's why I say everybody should have a podcast, meaning I would never tell someone, "Hey, don't do it because it's so time consuming." You would never say that with Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. So that's where I come at from that side.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it, because I think I agree with you that if somebody wants to, they should do it, and they shouldn't feel the pressure of not doing it. They shouldn't feel anxious. They shouldn't let their fear of the worst possible outcome stop them from doing something that they want to do. And, Gary V, I can't believe we talked about like two of the most, like we talked about Joe Rogan. Now I'm going to mention Gary V.
Love him.
But one thing that he did was he started doing that coffee cup thing where he didn't put his name on it. He didn't talk about it. He just said, I wonder if I can just go to garage sales and buy coffee cups and turn this into a little business and talk about it and have people just completely at a whim. And he proved that there's enough people out there that collect coffee cups to be able to build a side hustle on. And to me, that was just like a light bulb in my brain that said, okay, like if you collect anything and you consider yourself an expert on that thing, or maybe you do a sport that is unusual and you consider yourself an expert, there's definitely 1,000 or 2,000 or even 10,000 people out in the world that are dying for whatever it is you're about to say. The key is just to find them.
Yeah. Big Gary V guy here, by the way. Shocked that after this many minutes now we're bringing up Gary V. I love him. And again, he's another little bit of a, love him or hate him kind of a guy. I'll give you, if you have heard of Gary V and you are like, maybe it's too abrasive for you or whatever, I found what I think is kind of a Gary V light, if you will. So his name is John Acuff, Acuff. He's on Twitter, and he's got, what's his podcast? It Takes a Goal. So ITG or something like that. But John Acuff, very much in the same hustle, work hard, love your family, those kind of aspects, but without the cursing and without the, getting in your face type of Gary V. So I really kind of enjoy both of their styles. And just one is kind of like, after I first found John Acuff, I was like, it's like this dude's Gary V light. Like I get it. It's all positive. I love it.
Yeah, it's like Gary V minus the hustle economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is all good. I love that you mentioned coffee mugs. I didn't go into it as much as Gary did, but I've made several hundred on eBay with coffee mugs. Like, give you a hint, man. Go to your local Goodwill. I think they sell mugs for about 50 cents each. I have sold, 20 or 30, 40 mugs at about $20 to $30 a piece on eBay. It's crazy. I don't get it. I'm not a mug guy, but I'm a money guy. I'll take a few extra dollars.
Yeah. I mean, the message is that people collect all sorts of stuff. And just because you don't find it valuable,
right,
doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there that could find it valuable.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we kind of wrap up, is there one thing that you're struggling with that we could ask the community to comment on, to maybe give us some advice?
Yeah. It's the editing side. Like, who's going to come along, and maybe it's out there and you can point me in the right direction, but how do we figure out how to edit our audio so it is better? I mean, that is an important aspect, but not spend days doing it, right?
Right.
If somehow there's a little machine that you feed your audio file in and it spits it out perfect, man, that person's going to be rich, because that would be something I would pay for on our podcast. That's my biggest struggle. It's guests are easy. Topics, my interview style, I feel like at least is pretty good. I could always use, advice on that side of it. But, man, editing, that's a big, editing and equipment are kind of the two big controversial, huge topics, in podcasting right now.
All right. Well, we'll leave it up to the comments to school us on that stuff. And we'll see what they say. Hopefully it's troll free.
Hey, trolls are good, man. Bring it on. I'm all good.
Yeah. All right. So why don't you tell everybody where to find you? Give us all your social media.
Yeah, man, I am all in on Twitter, as I've been saying all week. So that is honestly the best place, and it's the easiest to remember. So my name is Mike Cunningham. My Twitter is at Mike Cunningham. So no spaces, dashes, all that kind of stuff. Just spell my name. And I put my money where my mouth is. You connect with me on Twitter and send me a message. I actually respond. It's a social network for me. So it's no different than sending me a text message, if you will. So that's the best place is through Twitter.
That's amazing. And we'll put all of your links plus your podcast links. And if anybody's into track and field related stuff, you'll have all those links below. And I really appreciate you being on the show, Mike. We've learned so many great nuggets about corporate podcasting, about legacy podcasting, about doing it on the cheap and sounding great. I mean, we probably have so many nuggets. I don't know what I'm going to title this video. So it's going to be a surprise to all of us.
Well, you're welcome. Make it a little bit harder for you. You're welcome.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much to Mike Cunningham, host of the Gill Athletics Track and Field Connections podcast. I think I learned everything I know about corporate podcasting in this last 30-minute interview. I'll put all of Mike's links, plus links to everything that we talked about on today's show, down in the description box below, so if anything's interesting to you, you can click it. If you're an indie podcaster and you're looking to grow your show, check out indiedropin.com/creators for a chance to be featured on one of Indie Drop-In's shows for free. Of course, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and click that bell so you don't miss anything. It really helps. And we interview lots of other podcast creators, including some of these right up here. You can just click one of these boxes and go to the next one. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.